People want to believe the world is more than what it appears to be. Because a world without mystery is a world without a soul. Since the dawn of civilization, humanity has carried stories that refuse to fade. Stories of vanished kingdoms, of divine punishment, of treasures guarded by unseen forces. These stories were not born in books. They were whispered beside fires, passed from one generation to the next. And with every retelling, something changed. Heroes became greater. Disasters became more terrible. Truth slowly blurred into legend. Myths are not simply fantasies. They are memories shaped by fear, faith, and time. Even today, in an age of satellites, DNA sequencing, and deep-sea robots, we continue to chase these ancient riddles. Because every time science answers one question, another opens in its place. This is a journey into 7 of the greatest mysteries in history. Mysteries that shaped civilizations, inspired obsession, and still haunt the modern world. And it begins with a king who was never meant to be remembered. In the blistering heat of Egypt's Valley of the Kings, the year was 1922. For centuries, grave robbers had stripped the desert of its secrets. Many believed the valley was exhausted, its treasures long gone. But one man refused to accept that conclusion. After years of failure, dwindling funds, and mounting pressure, an archaeologist uncovered something extraordinary beneath the sand. A single stone step, then another, and another. What lay below was a sealed doorway, untouched by time. A short telegram was sent. Its words were simple, but their impact would echo around the world. A magnificent tomb had been found, intact. When the entrance was finally opened, history held its breath. Inside lay a spectacle unlike anything seen before. Golden shrines nested within one another, barely an inch apart. Statues stood watch in the shadows. And at the heart of it all, a young pharaoh rested behind layers of gold and stone, his face concealed by a mask so lifelike it seemed to breathe. Tutankhamun, the boy king. The discovery captivated the world. Newspapers hailed it as the greatest archaeological find of all time. But almost immediately, celebration gave way to fear. Within months, death followed the excavation. The financier behind the dig fell ill after a simple insect bite. Infection spread. He died in Cairo. Soon after, others connected to the tomb passed away under strange or sudden circumstances. The press seized the story with hunger. A legend was born almost overnight. They called it the Curse of the Pharaoh. According to rumor, an ancient warning promised death to anyone who disturbed the king's eternal rest. 17 people would eventually be linked, directly or indirectly, to the supposed curse. Each death added fuel to a growing fire of fear and fascination. Coincidence was no longer enough. But the truth behind Tutankhamun was far more complex than any curse. Ironically, the young pharaoh had been a minor figure in Egyptian history. He ascended the throne as a child and ruled for less than 10 years. He died before reaching adulthood. After his death, his name was erased, his monuments dismantled, his legacy buried beneath deliberate silence. Without the discovery of his tomb, the world might never have known he existed at all. As the treasures were removed, archaeologists faced an unexpected problem. Resin used in the embalming process had hardened over centuries, fusing the mummy to its golden mask. Careful methods failed. Time ran out. And in the end, force was used. The mask was torn free, the body was disassembled. What should have been preservation became destruction. Decades later, modern science finally examined the remains with new eyes. The results shattered the image of a god-king. Genetic analysis revealed a young man born sick. the product of generations of royal incest. He suffered from bone deformities, walked with difficulty, and carried the scars of chronic illness. More than 100 walking canes had been buried with him, silent testimony to a life of pain. The dazzling golden mask had hidden a fragile human being. There was no evidence of murder. No proof of supernatural vengeance. Disease, genetic defects, and infection told a far more ordinary story. So where did the curse come from? Perhaps it was never about magic at all. Perhaps it was born from guilt, from arrogance, from the unsettling feeling that something sacred had been violated. Or perhaps it existed because humanity needs mystery. Because gold alone is not enough. And a forgotten king is only interesting when death seems to follow in his wake. The curse of the pharaoh may not have been carved into stone, but it was etched deeply into the human imagination. And once a myth takes hold, it becomes almost impossible to bury again. Long before maps were drawn and borders were named, there was a story that refused to sink. A story whispered across centuries about a land of impossible wealth and terrifying knowledge. A place where humans lived closer to gods than to nature. A civilization so advanced that even memory struggled to contain it. Its name was Atlantis. According to the ancient account, it was not hidden in mist or legend at first. It was real, vast, powerful, surrounded by water, shaped in perfect rings, crowned by temples that gleamed with metal unknown to the rest of the world. At its center stood a sanctuary dedicated to a sea god, a symbol of harmony between mankind and divine order. But harmony did not last. The people of Atlantis grew proud. Their technology outpaced their wisdom, their power eclipsed their restraint. And when arrogance replaced balance, the gods made a decision that would echo through time. In a single day and night of catastrophe, Atlantis vanished. Swallowed by earthquakes, consumed by fire, pulled beneath the sea. No survivors, no ruins, only a warning. For generations, the story was treated as metaphor, a philosophical lesson about hubris and punishment, a parable designed to humble civilizations that believed themselves invincible. But then a question began to surface, quietly at first, then louder with every passing century. What if Atlantis was not only a story? What if it was memory? Across the modern world, explorers, archaeologists, and dreamers began to search. Because if even a fragment of Atlantis were real, it would rewrite everything we know about the ancient past. One place in particular began to draw attention. An island shaped by fire and violence, its coastline broken into a vast circular scar. Long before postcards and sunsets, this land was defined by catastrophe. Thousands of years ago, a volcano here erupted with such force that it shattered the island itself. The center collapsed. The sea rushed in. Civilization vanished almost overnight. Those who believe in Atlantis saw more than coincidence. They saw rings of land and water, a city destroyed by fire and flood, a sudden end to a thriving culture. Beneath the waves surrounding the island, modern explorers began to search. Robots descended where divers could not. Cameras scanned the ocean floor, revealing ancient lava flows frozen in time. And then, something strange appeared. Stone steps, perfectly shaped, descending into darkness. Could they have been part of a harbor? An entrance? A city now erased from the surface of the earth? The discovery reignited hope. For some, it was proof that Atlantis had finally been found. For others, it was another illusion, nature masquerading as design. The deeper scientists looked, the more complicated the story became. Because the ancient text described Atlantis as lying beyond the Pillars of Hercules, far from this volcanic island. If the account was accurate, the lost civilization should rest somewhere else entirely. So the search moved again, this time to marshlands, dunes, and forgotten coastlines, to places where the sea once ruled and then retreated, reshaping the land with every century. Beneath layers of mud and sand, strange formations emerged, sharp angles, straight lines, shapes that nature rarely creates on its own. Walls, perhaps, or foundations, or nothing at all. Every potential clue carried a dangerous promise. Because to find Atlantis would be to prove that an advanced civilization existed long before recorded history allowed. It would mean that knowledge can rise and be erased completely. But evidence remained elusive. And yet, Atlantis refused to disappear, not because it was proven real, but because it spoke to something deeply human. The fear that greatness is fragile. The fear that collapse comes swiftly. The fear that no matter how advanced we become, we are never immune. In a world of skyscrapers, satellites, and nuclear power, Atlantis feels less like a fantasy and more like a mirror. A reminder that progress without humility leads only in one direction: down. Perhaps that is why the myth endures. Not because we will one day find its streets beneath the waves, but because its message survives above them. Atlantis may never be discovered. Its temples may remain buried forever. But its warning has already surfaced. Civilizations fall not when they are weak, but when they believe they cannot fall at all. And as the oceans continue to rise, and the ground beneath us grows increasingly unstable, the question lingers, quiet, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Was Atlantis a myth meant to scare us, or a memory meant to prepare us? Because if it happened once, it could happen again. For as long as humans have believed in salvation, they have searched for something to contain it. Not an idea, not a prayer, but an object. A vessel said to hold divine power, a relic that could heal the sick, grant eternal life, and legitimize kings. The Holy Grail. Its story begins not in legend, but at a table. The night before an execution that would change the course of history. A man lifts a cup of wine and tells his followers that what they are about to drink is more than liquid. It is blood. It is sacrifice. It is a promise that death is not the end. After that night, the cup disappears. Centuries pass. Empires rise and fall. And somewhere along the way, the Grail transforms. It is no longer just a cup. It becomes a symbol of ultimate truth, a conduit between humanity and the divine. Whoever possesses it is chosen. Whoever finds it is worthy. In medieval Europe, the legend explodes. Knights abandon kingdoms, armies march under the banner of faith. Crusaders scour the Holy Land, convinced that relics hold the key to power and redemption. Stories multiply. The Grail is described as wood, as stone, as gold. Sometimes it is a chalice, sometimes a dish, sometimes something far stranger. And always, it is just out of reach. The obsession does not fade with time. It intensifies. Because the Grail offers more than miracles. It offers legitimacy. To hold it is to prove divine approval. To possess it is to claim destiny itself. That is why emperors sought it, why secret orders guarded it, why myths wrapped themselves around real places. One such place still stands, a cathedral that has quietly guarded a cup for centuries, ornate, ancient, unassuming to the untrained eye. Believers claim this vessel is the very one lifted at the Last Supper. Scientific examinations reveal it was crafted in the Middle East nearly 2,000 years ago. The dates align, the materials fit, The path it might have traveled, through persecution, hiding, and exile, feels plausible. But plausibility is not proof. And proof has always been the Grail's greatest enemy. Beneath Rome, in the catacombs carved by early Christians fleeing death, images appear on ancient walls. Cups raised in ritual, used in secret. The first popes are said to have celebrated Mass underground, using a sacred vessel hidden from those who would destroy it. Then the trail fades again. Texts take over where evidence disappears. Medieval poems speak in riddles, disguising maps as verses. A knight named Parzival searches for the Grail not with strength, but with purity. His journey is not geographical, it is moral. He is told the Grail cannot be taken, it must be granted. Follow the clues, some believe, and you will find the place where stone and story intersect. High in the mountains, hidden monasteries cling to cliffs, half swallowed by rock. Their halls echo with silence. Their architecture mirrors descriptions written centuries earlier. Pillars, chambers, firelight. Spaces that feel designed not for comfort, but for reverence. There are signs that something was once venerated here. A cup, a ritual, a belief strong enough to survive persecution. But whether that object still exists, or ever did, remains unanswered. Across the sea, another legend takes root. A grieving man collects blood at the foot of a cross and carries it to a distant land, to an island wrapped in fog and myth. There, he hides the Grail, and from that soil, a kingdom rises. Knights gather around a round table. Equality replaces hierarchy. Power bows to virtue. And the Grail becomes the ultimate quest, the proof that a king rules not by force, but by divine right. Here, the Grail is never found. And perhaps that is the point. Because the Grail is less about possession than pursuit. It exists wherever belief is strongest, wherever faith demands proof, wherever humanity longs for something greater than itself. Empires have searched for it. Even in the 20th century, men intoxicated by ideology hunted the Grail, convinced it would grant invincibility. They found nothing. But the obsession revealed something darker, that belief, when twisted, becomes dangerous. In the end, the Holy Grail remains what it has always been. Not a cup, not a relic, but a question. Is redemption something we can hold, or only something we chase? Because the moment the Grail is found, its power disappears. And as long as it remains lost, it continues to rule the imagination, waiting, just beyond certainty. Gold has a voice. It whispers promises of power, of immortality, of a life lifted above ordinary limits. And wherever gold appears in myth, blood is never far behind. Along the slow, dark curve of the Rhine River, one such whisper has echoed for more than 1,000 years. It tells of a hero who could not be killed, of a treasure too great to be owned, and of a betrayal that doomed an entire people. This is the story of the Nibelung treasure. According to the ancient saga, the Rhine was once the heart of a powerful kingdom. Here lived Siegfried, the dragon slayer, a warrior said to have bathed in the beast's blood, rendering his skin invulnerable, except for a single spot. A familiar flaw, a fatal one. Siegfried possessed more than strength. He claimed a treasure beyond measure, cartloads of gold and silver, enchanted objects, and a cloak that granted invisibility. The treasure was not merely wealth. It was character. It shaped every decision, twisted every loyalty, and corrupted those who desired it. Siegfried married into royalty, and like many heroes before him, he trusted the wrong people. Jealousy took root, fear followed, and eventually betrayal. While hunting, Siegfried was struck down from behind. His invulnerability meant nothing. The treasure changed hands, and with it came panic. Because treasure like that cannot be shared. To protect it, and to prevent anyone else from claiming it, the gold was loaded onto carts and carried to the river. There it was sunk beneath the flowing water, hidden forever in the depths of the Rhine. Or so the story claims. What followed was annihilation. Alliances collapsed. Revenge consumed reason. Entire bloodlines were wiped out in a massacre so complete that it felt biblical. The saga ends not with victory, but with silence. A civilization erased. For centuries, the story was treated as legend. Entertaining, dramatic, unreliable, until history began to answer back. Along the Rhine, archaeologists uncovered traces of a real people, the Burgundians. They lived where the saga claimed. They fell when the saga said they did. Their kings shared names with the characters in the tale. Even their destruction matched the narrative. Crushed by enemies far more powerful than themselves. Myth and reality overlapped. And where they overlap, belief grows dangerous. Because if the people were real, then the treasure might be real too. The Rhine has always been a river of change. Its course shifts, its banks move. What was once riverbed is now forest. What was once shore is buried beneath soil and time. For treasure hunters, this is both curse and invitation. Over the years, objects have emerged from the river's grasp. Weapons, jewelry, coins, hoards buried in desperation during times of chaos. One discovery revealed hundreds of precious artifacts. Silver plates, decorated blades, vessels of immense value. Not Siegfried's gold, but something close enough to keep the legend alive. And legends survive on hope. Modern treasure hunters walk the forests along the Rhine with metal detectors, listening for the faintest signal. Occasionally, luck strikes. Gold flashes in the dirt. History resurfaces for a brief, intoxicating moment. Then, reality intervenes. The treasure is seized, catalogued, locked behind museum glass. The myth, however, escapes again. Because the real power of the Nibelung treasure is not its material value, it is what it represents. A truth older than writing, that wealth demands protection, that power breeds paranoia, that betrayal often comes from within. The treasure transforms from prize to poison, and those who touch it are rarely the ones who survive it. Perhaps the gold still lies beneath the Rhine, unreachable, waiting. Or perhaps it was scattered long ago, melted down, stripped of its identity. But the story endures because it speaks to something permanent. The idea that some riches are too great to possess, that some secrets destroy those who uncover them, that sometimes the safest place for power is where no one can reach it, hidden beneath flowing water, out of human hands, yet never out of the human mind. When a man becomes legend, even his death refuses to stay ordinary. In the 5th century, one name froze Europe in fear. Cities burned at its sound. Empires trembled before it. To enemies, he was the scourge of God. To his people, he was an unmatched ruler. Attila. He commanded an empire without borders, a moving force of horsemen that surged across the continent like a storm. The Huns left no monuments, no written records of their own. They conquered, negotiated, vanished, and moved on. And when Attila died, the silence around him grew even deeper. The circumstances of his death were as unsettling as his life. On the night of his wedding, after heavy celebration, Attila was found lifeless beside his young bride. No wound, no struggle, just blood on his face and a ruler who would never rise again. Some believed he choked, others suspected poison. But certainty died with him. What followed was stranger still. According to ancient accounts, Attila was buried in secret. His body placed within 3 coffins, iron, silver, and gold, each layer symbolizing power, wealth, and dominance. His followers were said to have diverted a river, buried their king beneath its bed, then released the water again to erase all traces of the grave. Those who took part in the burial were killed, ensuring that no one would ever reveal the location. If true, Attila's tomb is not just lost. It was designed to be unreachable. For centuries, historians dismissed the story as exaggeration. But the more researchers studied the era, the more plausible it became. Rivers change course. Landscapes shift. What was once underwater may now be dry land, forests, or fields. Some search along the Danube, believing the flowing water still guards its secret. Others turn to ancient manuscripts that hint at a forgotten royal city hidden in the hills. Scattered ruins, unusual stone formations, and buried walls have fueled speculation, but never certainty. Yet the question refuses to disappear. If Attila ruled the greatest empire of his age, where is his grave? Because to find it would mean uncovering more than gold. It would mean giving shape to a people history only knows through the words of their enemies. But some mysteries do not wait centuries to be reborn. Some erupt suddenly, violently, and in full view of terrified witnesses. In the forests of southern France, during the 18th century, something stalked the countryside. It did not strike from hunger alone. It targeted women and children. It decapitated its victims. The locals called it the Beast of Gévaudan. Panic spread faster than reason. Wolves were known, but this creature behaved differently. It showed no fear. It attacked in daylight, and it seemed to choose its victims with intention. Rumors spiraled out of control. Was it a demon? A punishment from God? A man cursed to walk as a wolf? For years, hunters failed to stop it. Armed patrols searched the woods, traps were set, prayers were spoken, nothing worked. The death toll rose, and fear transformed into hysteria. Until one day, a single shot ended it all. The beast fell, and the killing stopped. But instead of closure, the story deepened. The shot that killed the creature was nearly impossible. The distance was too great. The weapon too primitive. Some claimed the animal did not flee because it recognized the hunter. Others whispered that the beast was not just an animal, but part of a darker collaboration between man and monster. Modern theories suggest a trained hybrid, part wolf, part hound, raised to kill, or a serial murderer hiding behind fear and folklore. Torture-confessed werewolves from the same era reveal how easily myth could be weaponized, especially by institutions eager to control behavior through terror. Here, legend did not replace reality, it concealed it. Because sometimes, believing in monsters is easier than confronting human cruelty. And still, the pattern continues. When people face the unknown, when compasses spin, ships vanish, and skies refuse to behave, they reach for myth again. Over warm blue waters between continents lies a place with no official borders, no markers, and no agreed shape. Yet its name alone carries unease: the Bermuda Triangle. For centuries, sailors feared these waters. Sudden storms, erratic winds, unpredictable currents. In the modern age, planes joined ships in vanishing without explanation. Entire crews disappeared. No wreckage, no distress calls. The most famous case involved not one aircraft, but 5. A training squadron lost contact mid-flight, reporting compass failure and disorientation. They were never found. Stories multiplied. Time distortions, magnetic anomalies, lost cities beneath the sea. But as investigations deepened, something far less mystical emerged. The region sits atop ancient volcanic formations. Minerals beneath the ocean floor possess magnetic properties strong enough to interfere with navigation. Combined with sudden weather systems and powerful rogue waves, disaster could strike without warning. Enough to sink ships, enough to mislead pilots, enough to kill without leaving answers. Yet statistics show the area is no more dangerous than other heavily traveled waters. So why does the legend persist? Because the Bermuda Triangle is not defined by numbers. It is defined by imagination. It becomes whatever we fear most: aliens, Atlantis, chaos, or proof that the world is not fully under our control. And perhaps that is the common thread running through every great mystery. Not that the truth is unknowable, but that we are not always ready to accept it. Because where certainty ends, myth begins. And in that space, between what we know and what we fear, the greatest riddles in history continue to live. And when the stories finally fall silent, when the monsters retreat into forests and the oceans give back their wreckage, one truth remains. Mystery is not a flaw in human history. It is a feature. Every riddle we have followed, from cursed kings and sunken cities to sacred relics and hidden graves, reveals less about the past than it does about us. Because each generation reshapes these stories to match its fears, its hopes, its unanswered questions. The ancient world used myth to explain disaster. The medieval world used it to justify power. The modern world uses it to confront uncertainty. When science cannot yet give us clarity, myth steps in to fill the silence. That is why the pharaoh's curse mattered more than the facts of disease. Why Atlantis refuses to stay buried beneath philosophy. Why the Grail cannot be proven, only pursued. Why treasure hidden beneath rivers still calls to those who believe destiny can be uncovered with the right tool, the right map, the right obsession. These stories endure because they promise meaning. They suggest that history is not random, that catastrophe is not meaningless, that power is watched, that arrogance has consequences, even when the truth turns out to be ordinary. Illness instead of curses, volcanoes instead of gods, magnets instead of monsters. We hesitate to let go, because a fully explained world feels smaller, colder, less alive. And so the riddles remain. Not because we have failed to solve them, but because solving them is not the point. The point is the search, the questions we dare to ask, the boundaries we test between belief and evidence. Some mysteries will eventually be explained. Others will fade as new knowledge replaces old fears. But a few will always survive, reshaped by imagination, retold by voices yet unborn. Because as long as humans look into darkness and wonder what lies beyond, there will always be myths waiting to be discovered. And perhaps that is the greatest riddle of all. Not what these stories hide from us, but why we need them to exist. And even after the final words are spoken, the silence does not truly settle. Because long after the screen fades to black, these stories continue to work their way through the mind. They resurface in late-night thoughts, in quiet questions that have no urgency, only weight. What else have we forgotten? How many civilizations rose, believed themselves eternal, and vanished without leaving a name behind? How many truths were simplified into stories so they could survive the erosion of time? How many warnings were disguised as legends because raw facts alone were not strong enough to endure? History is written by those who remain. Myth belongs to those who are gone. And perhaps that is why myths feel alive. They are the voices of the forgotten, reaching forward through time, asking not to be solved, but to be remembered. We may never stand in the streets of Atlantis. We may never hold the Grail in our hands. We may never uncover the tombs of kings hidden beneath rivers or forests. But every generation repeats the same ritual. We search, we question, we imagine. Because deep down, we sense that understanding the past is not about certainty. It is about humility, about recognizing that knowledge can be lost, that power can collapse, that progress is fragile, and that the line between legend and reality is thinner than we like to admit. So the next time you hear a story dismissed as just a myth, remember this: myths are not born from nothing. They are born from moments so overwhelming, so transformative, that facts alone could not contain them. They are history's echo. And as long as humanity fears the unknown, worships power, and hopes for meaning beyond the visible world, new riddles will take their place beside the old ones. Waiting to be told again. Waiting to be believed. Waiting for someone, somewhere, to ask the same question that has followed us since the beginning of time. What if the story is true, and we simply forgot how to listen? And when that question is asked, history quietly opens its door once more. Not with answers, but with shadows, because the past does not reveal itself all at once. It leaves fragments, symbols, ruins without explanations. It allows us to approach, but never fully arrive. And in that distance between knowing and not knowing, something powerful happens. We begin to listen. We listen to the silence of tombs that were never found, to the ocean floors that keep their cities hidden, to forests that remember footsteps long erased by time. Every mystery we have followed is a reminder that human knowledge is temporary, but human curiosity is not. Tools evolve, theories collapse, certainties shift, yet the impulse remains the same as it was thousands of years ago: to look at the unknown and refuse to turn away. Because the unknown gives history its depth. Without mystery, the past would be flat, predictable, finished. With mystery, it breathes. And perhaps that is why we should be cautious about demanding final answers. Some stories are not meant to be closed. Some questions exist not to be solved, but to be carried forward, like a torch passed from one generation to the next. The riddles of history are not failures of understanding. They are invitations. Invitations to doubt arrogance, to challenge certainty, to remember that even at our most advanced, we stand on the edge of forgetting. One day, future generations will look back at us, at our cities, our machines, our confidence, and they too will find gaps, missing pieces, stories that sound impossible. And from those gaps, new myths will be born. Because history does not end. It transforms, and somewhere between fact and faith, between memory and imagination, the greatest mysteries will always remain, not as obstacles to truth, but as reminders of how fragile and how extraordinary the human story truly is. And when that transformation happens, when facts erode and memory reshapes them, one final pattern emerges. What survives is never the detail, never the date, never the measurement. What survives is meaning. The curse of a king becomes a warning about pride. A sunken city becomes a mirror held up to civilization. A sacred relic becomes a symbol of longing rather than proof. A hidden treasure becomes a lesson about greed. A lost grave becomes a reminder that even the greatest power ends in silence. Strip away the names, and the stories remain. That is why these riddles endure across cultures and centuries. They are not bound to one place or one people. They adapt, they migrate, they return in new forms: urban legends, conspiracy theories, modern myths, each carrying the same emotional core: fear of collapse, desire for meaning, hope that something greater exists beyond what we can touch. And perhaps the greatest mistake we can make is trying to force these stories into neat conclusions. Because the moment a mystery is fully explained, it loses its power to warn, to humble, to inspire. The unknown keeps us cautious. It keeps us curious. It reminds us that certainty is temporary. So maybe the greatest riddles in history were never meant to be solved. Maybe they exist to slow us down, to make us question our confidence, to whisper that progress without reflection leads only in circles. And as long as humanity continues to build, to conquer, to believe itself immune to the mistakes of the past, these stories will return again and again, wearing new names in new places, carrying the same ancient message. Listen carefully, because history does not shout its lessons. It hides them in stories. And it waits to see who is wise enough to hear them. And even then, the story does not truly end. Because the moment we believe we have reached the conclusion, we reveal something about ourselves. That we crave closure in a world that rarely offers it. History resists neat endings. It frays at the edges. It leaves doors half open. The riddles remain not as unfinished business, but as quiet companions to human progress. Every age believes it stands at the peak of understanding. Every age looks back and smiles at the innocence of those who came before. And yet, time has a way of humbling certainty. What we explain today may become tomorrow's mystery. What we dismiss as impossible may one day feel obvious in hindsight. The people who built temples now buried beneath sand believed their gods would protect them. The sailors who vanished into open water trusted their instruments. The rulers who chased relics and treasures were convinced destiny favored them. None of them expected to become stories. And yet, here they are, reduced not to what they owned or controlled, but to what they left unresolved. Perhaps that is the final truth hidden inside every great mystery, that permanence is an illusion. Civilizations fade, knowledge fractures, power dissolves, but questions endure. As long as humans look back and wonder, as long as we sense that something has slipped through our fingers, history will continue to speak in riddles rather than answers. Not to confuse us, but to remind us that we are not the first to search, that we will not be the last, and that the unknown is not an enemy to be conquered, but a boundary that gives meaning to everything within it. Because without mystery, history would be complete, and a complete history would no longer be alive. And so the thread returns to where it began, to a simple human impulse that has never changed, the need to believe that the world is deeper than what we can see. Because if everything could be explained, measured, cataloged, and closed, then wonder would vanish. Fear would vanish. Faith would vanish. And with them, a part of what makes us human. The greatest riddles in history are not mistakes waiting to be corrected. They are spaces deliberately left open, spaces where imagination breathes, where caution is learned, where humility takes root. They remind us that knowledge is powerful, but never complete, that progress is real, but never permanent, that even at the height of certainty, something can always slip beyond our grasp. And maybe that is why these stories return again and again, why they refuse to be buried, dismissed, or forgotten. Because each generation needs its mysteries, needs its warnings, needs its unanswered questions, not to frighten us into paralysis, but to keep us aware of how fragile our achievements truly are. So when you hear of a cursed king, a lost city, a sacred relic, or a vanishing ship, listen closely, not for proof, not for resolution, but for what the story is trying to preserve. A memory, a lesson, a reminder that the line between rise and ruin is thinner than it appears. History does not ask us to solve its riddles. It asks us to remember them. Because the moment we stop wondering, the moment we stop listening, we risk becoming the next mystery someone else will one day try to understand. And that is where the silence finally earns its place. Not as an ending, but as a pause. A pause that allows the weight of everything before it to settle. Because history does not demand applause or resolution. It demands reflection. It asks us to sit with uncertainty rather than rush to escape it. The riddles endure because they resist ownership. No empire can claim them. No ideology can fully bend them. They exist beyond borders, beyond centuries, beyond certainty. They belong to no one and to everyone. In every age, humans have tried to dominate the unknown, to name it, to control it, to drain it of fear. But the unknown always adapts. It moves deeper, quieter, waiting for the next generation to believe it has finally been conquered. And when that belief hardens into arrogance, history repeats itself. Cities rise believing they are permanent. Power concentrates believing it is deserved. Knowledge expands believing it is complete, until something breaks. And afterward, when the dust settles, what remains is never the strength, the technology, or the ambition. What remains is the story, a distorted memory of what once was, a warning disguised as legend, a riddle left behind for others to interpret. That is why these mysteries matter. Not because they promise hidden gold or lost miracles, but because they remind us that we too are temporary. That one day, our own world may be reduced to fragments, to symbols, to myths, to unanswered questions. And someone, far in the future, may look back at us and wonder what we believed, what we feared, what we failed to understand. They will search for meaning in our ruins. They will argue over our intentions. They will turn our certainties into their mysteries, just as we have done with those who came before us. And in that moment, the circle will be complete. History will continue, not as a record of answers, but as a chain of questions stretching endlessly through time, waiting for the next listener. And perhaps that is the quiet truth hidden beneath every great mystery. That history is not a straight line moving toward clarity, but a cycle of remembering and forgetting. We uncover fragments. We build narratives around them. We convince ourselves we understand. And then time erases us in return. The people of the future will not inherit our certainty. They will inherit our questions, our ruins, our half-answers. They will debate our intentions the same way we debate the past, through broken evidence and inherited stories. Some will call us advanced. Others will call us reckless. Many will misunderstand us completely. And from those misunderstandings, new myths will be born. Because myth is not the enemy of truth. It is what remains when truth becomes unreachable. So when we speak of the greatest riddles in history, we are not really speaking about curses, lost cities, sacred relics, or vanishing ships. We are speaking about ourselves. about a species that fears forgetting more than death, that tells stories so meaning can survive when facts cannot, that leaves riddles behind as proof that we once existed, wondered, and tried to understand our place in the world. The mysteries endure because they are unfinished conversations between past and future. And as long as humanity continues to ask, what came before us? What did we miss? What warning was left unheeded? The silence will never be empty. It will be full of echoes, waiting for someone, somewhere, to listen. And when we listen closely enough, those echoes begin to sound familiar. They carry the same doubts we feel today, the same confidence that tomorrow will be better, the same blindness to the cracks forming beneath our feet. Every civilization believes it is different, smarter, more prepared, more permanent, and every civilization leaves behind the same question. How did they not see it coming? The ruins of the past were once alive with certainty, with people who believed their knowledge was sufficient, their gods attentive, their systems stable. None of them imagined they would one day be reduced to fragments studied in silence. And yet, here they are, not as warnings written in stone, but as riddles written in absence. Perhaps that is why mystery is essential. It interrupts complacency. It reminds us that collapse does not announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, disguised as progress, comfort, inevitability. The myths endure because they force us to look sideways at history, not straight through it. To see patterns instead of timelines, consequences instead of causes. They whisper that power without restraint is temporary, that knowledge without humility is fragile, that survival is never guaranteed. And so the greatest riddles in history are not failures of explanation. They are invitations to awareness. To remember that what we build today will one day be interpreted by strangers, that our truths may become their legends, that our silence may become their questions. History does not ask us to fear the unknown. It asks us to respect it. Because in the end, the unknown is not where history disappears. It is where history waits. For the next voice, for the next listener, for the next story to begin. And when that next story begins, it will not announce itself as history. It will feel ordinary. It will unfold quietly, beneath routines and assumptions, beneath the confidence that this time is different. No one ever realizes they are living inside a future mystery. People only recognize that much later, when fragments are all that remain. That is why the present is always blind to itself. Those who lived beside the Nile did not think they were building legends. Those who sailed into uncertain waters did not believe they were feeding myths. Those who trusted symbols, relics, power, and progress did not imagine they would one day be reduced to questions. Yet every era becomes a riddle once its voice is gone. What survives are not intentions, but traces, not explanations, but consequences, not certainty, but interpretation. And interpretation is where myth is born. So perhaps the greatest illusion is the belief that mystery belongs only to the past, that we stand outside the cycle, observing it safely from a distance. In truth, we are already inside it. Our cities, our technologies, our conflicts, our faith in control, these too will one day be filtered through absence. Someone will ask why we believed what we believed, why we ignored certain warnings, why we trusted systems that failed. And lacking our answers, they will create their own, just as we have done. Because history does not preserve clarity, it preserves tension between what was intended and what occurred, between what was known and what was ignored, between what was explained and what was left unsaid. That tension is where riddles live. And as long as humanity continues to seek meaning beyond survival, beyond food, shelter, and safety, there will always be mysteries. Not because we are incapable of understanding everything, but because understanding everything would strip the world of depth. Mystery gives history gravity. It gives memory weight. It gives existence resonance. And so the greatest riddles do not ask to be solved. They ask to be respected, because one day, inevitably, we will join them, not as answers, but as echoes. And when we finally become those echoes, the pattern will repeat once more. Our monuments will crumble, our records will fragment, our voices will fade into interpretation. What remains will not be who we truly were, but who we are remembered to be. Future minds will debate our intentions. They will argue over our motives, our beliefs, our mistakes. They will find artifacts stripped of context and build entire narratives around them. Some of those stories will be close to the truth. Others will drift far from it. And over time, the difference will stop mattering, because memory does not survive as accuracy. It survives as meaning. This is why the greatest riddles in history never disappear. They are not puzzles with missing pieces. They are mirrors, reflecting whatever era chooses to look into them. Each generation sees its own fears, its own hopes, its own blind spots staring back. When we fear collapse, we see Atlantis. When we fear corruption, we see cursed kings and poisoned power. When we fear meaninglessness, we search for sacred relics. When we fear chaos, we imagine monsters in forests and oceans. The myths change shape, but the anxieties remain the same. And perhaps that is the most unsettling realization of all. That despite centuries of progress, the core of the human mind has barely changed. We still crave explanations larger than ourselves. We still resist the idea that chance and fragility govern so much of existence. We still want to believe that behind every disaster lies a reason, a warning, a hidden order. Mystery gives us that comfort. Not because it explains everything, but because it suggests that something is watching, something is guiding, something is connecting the fragments into a larger whole. Even if that something is only a story. And so the riddles endure, not as failures of history, but as proof that history is alive, that it still speaks, even when its voice is broken, that it still teaches, even when its lessons are indirect. In the end, the greatest mysteries are not about what was lost. They are about what we refuse to let go. As long as humans continue to wonder, to fear, to hope, and to search for meaning beyond the visible world, history will never be silent. It will whisper. And somewhere, someone will always be listening. And in that listening, something quietly endures. Not certainty, not proof, but connection. Because every riddle we inherit binds us to those who came before. Across centuries, across collapsed empires, across forgotten languages, the same questions survive. Who were we? What did we believe? What destroyed us? What did we fail to understand in time? These questions are older than writing, older than stone. They pass from hand to hand without needing names. And each generation answers them differently, using the tools, fears, and hopes of its own moment. That is why the past never truly settles. It shifts as we do. What was once a god becomes a metaphor. What was once a monster becomes a diagnosis. What was once divine punishment becomes geology, biology, probability. And yet, even when the explanation is found, The story rarely dies, because explanation satisfies the mind, but mystery speaks to something deeper. It speaks to the feeling that existence is fragile, that meaning is not guaranteed, that knowledge, no matter how advanced, will always be incomplete. And in that incompleteness, humanity finds both fear and purpose. The riddles remind us that control is temporary, that certainty is borrowed, that survival is not the same as understanding. They warn us without commanding. They teach us without lecturing. They endure because they adapt. And perhaps that is the final lesson hidden beneath every great mystery. That history does not move toward answers. It moves toward awareness. Awareness that we are part of a long, unbroken chain of curiosity. That we inherit not just the achievements of the past, but its unanswered questions. That one day we will pass both on. So the riddles remain, not waiting to be solved, not waiting to be dismissed, but waiting to be remembered. Because as long as humanity continues to look into the darkness and ask, what came before us? What did we miss? What warning was left behind? History will never be finished. It will only change its voice. And the greatest mysteries will continue to speak, softly, patiently, to anyone willing to listen. And eventually, even the listening gives way to silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of acceptance. The understanding that some truths are not meant to arrive fully formed, that some answers lose their power the moment they are fixed in place. That mystery, when preserved, keeps history human. Because history is not a ledger of facts. It is a record of longing. Longing to understand where we came from. Longing to believe our rise was not accidental. Longing to think our fall, when it comes, will mean something. The greatest riddles endure because they grant us that meaning without demanding certainty. They allow us to stand between fear and wonder, between knowledge and humility, without forcing a choice. They remind us that the past was once as uncertain as the present, that the people we mythologize were no different from us, confident, afraid, hopeful, blind, and that the distance between a living civilization and a forgotten legend is often far shorter than anyone expects. So perhaps the role of these mysteries is not to be solved, but to remain, to slow us down when progress accelerates too fast, to unsettle us when confidence hardens into arrogance, to whisper that no matter how far we go, something essential will always lie just beyond our reach. And in that space, between knowing and not knowing, we find perspective. Because the moment we accept that history will never be complete, that certainty will never be final, we begin to understand our place within it, not as masters of the past, not as judges of those who came before, but as temporary guardians of a story that will outlive us, a story filled with gaps, with shadows, with riddles, waiting for the next voice to tell it again. History leaves us questions, not answers. Which of these 7 mysteries do you believe hides the most truth, and why? Was it Atlantis, the Grail, or something we still haven't discovered yet? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe history still has secrets worth listening to, consider subscribing.